Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today I have a very special guest on, Philip Pape. He's from the Wits Weights Podcast. I'm sure, we've collaborated multiple times. We've done Q&As. And so I know a lot of people that I reach out to have found me through Philip's podcast. So I'm sure people are listening are very familiar with him. But if you are not familiar with Philip, he is a certified nutrition coach. He is a high-performance physique engineer and the host of the Wits Weights Podcast. As I said, he specializes in helping high-performing individuals achieve their ideal physiques through evidence-based nutrition and strength training. Right up our alley here. Philip, thanks for coming on, man. I know we just also released an episode on your podcast where we chatted about being at maintenance calories and how that can help with a body recomp. And you interviewed me on that. And so if you want to check that out, make sure you go and check out Philip's podcast, Wits Weights. I believe we're going to put this in the show notes in terms of the exact episode and everything like that. But welcome to the podcast, man.
Thank you, man. It's so much fun to be here and talk to you again about all these topics.
Philip is a very good host and has a very good voice for podcasting. As you told me off air that you're thinking about switching over to just doing audio, and you got a great
I don't know if that's the reason why, but okay, I'll take it.
Was there anything I missed in terms of the introduction that you want to know about, like the kind of collaboration that we're doing?
Yeah, he's a really great guy. He's a father of two. No, it's all good, man. We're just trying to help people out. Using the evidence, helping people out, training hard, eating protein.
He's an amazing guy, all that stuff. If you check out that episode, we talk about maintenance or body recomp near maintenance. And so what we want to do here is talk about putting yourself into a small surplus, small deficit, and what that looks like. So I think for you, how I want to start this is, to you, what is a body recomp? Because I think it does depend on each kind of person you ask. So I'm curious, for you, what is a body recomp to you?
When I first got started, to me, body recomp was the very narrow definition of lose fat, build muscle at the same time, mostly at maintenance, or some of the bro terms like main gain, lean gain, maintain, whatever, gaintain. And my definition is expanded to include really any reasonably short period of time where you gain muscle and lose fat and don't go to extremes. And I'm not saying extremes are bad. You and I know we love to bulk, we love to cut, but sometimes people are not looking to do that. It doesn't fit their schedule, doesn't fit their lifestyle. So to me, it could be 6 months, a year, even a 2-year phrase. I would say if you're going to 5 years of training and cutting and bulking, getting recomp that way, that's not really what I'm talking about today. And that's how I define it.
We're talking here in the short term, doing a combination of both here. For you, is it at the same time, or do you find that like having these kind of small phases from time to time where you focus on one or the other beneficial?
So I know you and I talked on my show about how it's not necessarily really maintenance, right? A lot of times we're actually in a slight surplus anyway. So for me, I do think of them independently because I feel if you combine them together, you half-ass the different variables like training, where your mind is going to both and hoping to get both results. And in reality, I feel like we need to be focused. So I do separate them out. And if I'm working with a client, even if it's not a meaningful surplus or deficit, we're thinking one direction and going after it all out. And then we get the benefits of both.
How do you determine like which direction you want to go here with them?
That's a really good question, right? Because the easy answer is it depends. You talk to the client and you figure it out. But I've found that there are buckets of individuals, different demographics and psychographics where they want you to help them understand what's best for them. I hate to put it that way, not patronizingly, but more of, say, I work with a lot of postmenopausal women who either haven't trained or haven't really trained effectively, right? And they might have 10 pounds to lose, not 20, not 30, not the higher levels of fat loss, but hey, I got to lose that last 5 pounds, the last 10 pounds. And like you, and like we recommend to a lot of people, we put them into maintenance initially because the goal isn't to try to just change everything all at once. It's to establish your training, establish your consistency with your food, sleep, stress, all the pillars. But then what happens is the magical thing where they're getting super strong, their squats going up. I do a lot of barbell training with folks, but occasionally we'll do machines and dumbbell work. And they're just getting really strong. And there's a lot of narrative, a lot of, what am I trying to say? Self-identity statements that come out of that you really try to encourage psychologically. I'm getting strong. I'm pushing my lifts. I'm feeling great in my clothes. I have energy, all of that stuff that's associated with eating enough food as well. And then sometimes a switch turns, Jeff, where they like give up the idea of fat loss per se and understand that it's going to come, but they really want to keep going down this route of like building muscle, but not like gaining 20 pounds. It's just, I got the last 5 pounds to lose. Let's not worry about that. Let's train hard. And it's probably going to happen anyway.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So like they change their mindset from thinking that they just want to do fat loss. And then you show them the benefits of eating a little bit more. And then that kind of becomes a thing of, okay, now they want to spend more time there gaining. And again, like you said, nothing crazy, but at least making sure they're well fueled and everything like that for training.
Yeah. And I think it's a good backup plan. And let me explain what I mean. You ever worked with a client who's like pretty darn lean, right? Or maybe a low body weight. Like I've had female clients who weigh like 115, 120, fairly short. They've already gone through several years of nutrition consistency and training. And now they come to me and I'm like, oh, geez, how am I going to get them like the next 5 pounds? Because it's tough, right? And what you find is as you make progress, as your body adapts, you go into the fat loss phase, you do hit points of resistance, right? Everybody hits those points of resistance because of adaptation, especially when you're extremely lean. So when you take a diet break in that context, sometimes the diet break, it's like a form of maintenance game change for the situation. And you sometimes end up extending that for weeks or months because that is actually the thing you needed. Even after a little bit of fat loss, you needed to get back to maintenance and experience the growth that comes from that before you then potentially try fat loss again, or maybe you don't need it again.
Yeah. Like we said on your episode, it's like, hey, the goal obviously is to get people to, from a fat loss perspective, really try to get, I feel, as little as possible throughout the year over time. I think that's the best place to be. Because I'm sure for you, how often do you fat loss diet now at this point?
It's 7 weeks, usually a year, like 7 to 12 weeks a year.
Well, I can help it. Well, that's the thing. It's like 7 weeks. I'm sure you lose a good amount there of fat in that 7 weeks. So you almost are like more efficient and effective at it too when you do go back to it.
Yeah, I lose like 15 pounds. So I weigh around 185, 190. I'm 5'9". So I'll get down to 170, 175, and then I'll push it to the 190s again. But man, you know how it is with bulking. Again, you have set points where just the scale does not want to move and that metabolism just cranks up. I go from eating like 2,000 calories in a diet to 4,000 calories in a surplus. And not everybody wants to do that, which is why we talk about body recomp.
So let's talk then specifics of like fat loss and surplus there. So we can start with either one, whichever one you want, but what does that kind of setup look like? What are we looking at in terms of the deficit, the size of the deficit? How do you go about that?
Yeah, on a fat loss perspective, so we're talking about body recomp, right? When we're not trying to get, one thing I think is important for people to understand is there is a deficit for most people where everything starts to tank. That's what I've seen. Okay. I don't know how this is anecdotal, but what I mean by that is you might be in a 500 calorie deficit and everything is pretty decent in terms of your biofeedback, your hunger, you're managing it, you're eating plenty of fiber, fruits and all that, and it's all good. You drop another 100 calories and it's like misery town, right? And so if you could find that for somebody or find that for yourself, that's like my cutoff for sustainable fat loss. But when we're talking body recomp, I think you want to have a minimum deficit as well, because otherwise, and we talked about this on my show, what happens, you end up being underfed, your body slowly drifts into adapting to that level, and now you're in a diet without the benefits of the diet. Who wants that? Who wants to be undereat? And guess what that sounds like? Most people for their whole life when they're yo-yo dieting, I'm not losing weight, but I feel like I'm starving myself. So it's like you have to find that threshold above which it starts to move. And that could be as little as 200 calorie deficit. It doesn't have to be anything massive, but it's enough where you have a drift in fat loss, but you're still potentially gaining muscle or at least really easily holding onto your muscle. And Jeff, you've probably seen with like beginners, they can build some muscle in a very slight surplus. The best responders I found are people who are quite a bit overweight. And then on top of that, who are detrained and quite a bit overweight. Man, you could put them in a 500 calorie deficit and they'll gain muscle fast and their expenditure will go up and it's like the magic starts to happen. But even if you're just a little bit overweight, you haven't trained before, you're going to respond because you're new to this. If you're leaner, if you're more muscular, all of that, I feel like more aggressive measures are generally needed and you're not going to benefit too much from a super slight deficit.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's like you said, you can ramp up the aggressiveness based on body fat and everything like that. I think people often overlook that part and they just think, again, they just look at the deficit of, oh, hey, if I'm aggressive, but again, the body fat percentage and where somebody's coming from, man, is just super important. I just think so many people overlook that process. So within this, then, when we're talking, you said, hey, maybe 200 calories. What are you looking at in terms of making sure that somebody's in that right amount? You said, so are you looking at their average weight from week to see where is that what you're going off of? Or like, where do you start to maybe make that adjustment if you need to make sure they're eating enough, but not seeing again to where it's holy crap right now we're like in too large of a deficit for you?
Yeah, I like to start by a rate of loss to get the per week drop that you're looking for. So combined with the sustainability of it. What I mean by that is if we think let's go for 0.5% a week loss, but that puts you in a calorie level that's just not going to work. It's going to be more conservative than that. So I start with 1%. Maybe it's 0.25% a week. That obviously determines the deficit. And then we used a trend of weight over time. You and I talked about daily weigh-ins. All my clients weigh every day. And we use like a 3-week trend to see if fat loss is truly changing, which means you have to be pretty darn precise with the data when you're talking about a smaller level of fat loss. You're never going to be perfect, but as long as you see that drift, you're good. And then we just adjust accordingly.
Is there anything else you're looking for specifically, like in this fit, like during the deficit again, or is there anything like that you feel like is super important to monitor and look out for and watch during this time?
All the things, right? Like for my clients, no matter what situation they're in, we're going to look at your training, right? And so in a deficit, you're going to be training hard, getting that stimulus you need, but we're going to look at volume because your energy needs are a little bit lower. And we're going to make sure that you're using some auto regulation in your programming, because you're not necessarily going to hit PRs. That's one. Obviously, sleep, stress, movement, energy flux are critical. They're always critical, right? So at the end of the day, if your feedback scores are coming in on a scale of 1 to 10, say 7 or above, I'm pretty happy. It's really up to the client to say, this isn't working or this is working in terms of, does it fit within your lifestyle? I tend to work with clients who are not the most advanced, who want to enjoy their lives, right? And as opposed to athletes who like are going to be totally dialed in. I've worked with a few of those though. It's fun, right? Because they're like dialed in. But it's actually almost a little bit more challenging to say, okay, I'm going to have random times that I have to go out. My friend's going to want to go out to drinks. I'm going to want to go travel. I have business travel, whatever, and make that work while in fat loss, which just makes it easier when the deficit isn't as large. I don't know if that answered your question, but it's biofeedback, it's training, it's the deficit, the weight trend, all, and as well as body measurements, right? You could see, hey, is that waist dropping? That's like the primary measure of fat loss. For women, your hips may be dropping as well, but you also have to account for the fact that you might be building some muscles. So looking at the neck, the thighs, the chest, and putting all that together.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you utilize any like higher calorie days, diet breaks during fat loss to help from a recomp perspective or anything like that? During this?
It depends, right? It depends. My default position is, let's simplify it. Let's do even distribution of calories. And then let's see what patterns emerge. Usually we know that already before they go into fat loss because we've spent a good at least 4 to 8 weeks at maintenance. But you never know because life could change, right? Stress can change. Your work situation changes. And even the diet breaks and refeed strategy can change 2 weeks later depending on what's going on. So I usually tell clients we're looking at the weekly average. I don't give you red, yellow, green based on your compliance. It's more of, hey, are you in the ballpark and are we hitting a certain deficit and seeing the progress? If not, we're going to have to make a trade-off somewhere. But if you're constantly struggling on Saturday and Sunday, the solution may not be to white knuckle it. It may be, let's just shift some calories over there.
Yeah, I find the concept of that interesting, right? It's if someone's not actively dropping weight, it's like those, you don't need to worry about diet breaks or refeeds or anything like that, right? Because it's like, hey, we got to make sure you actually get into a deficit first. So like you said, yeah, very dependent on the client. Is there anything else from a fat loss perspective that maybe I didn't ask or that you want to let the audience know about in terms of how you approach it or anything that you felt was super important here?
Oh man, again, I will say it's not super common that I see as far as if I stacked up 200 clients, how many of them are doing very moderate fat loss? It's very small. Because I feel like I like efficiency and I feel like most people either need to go a little more aggressively into fat loss or don't even be in a deficit. So that's my position on that. But I have had clients who, for example, maybe they're not as responsive to a bigger deficit or they have everybody's responsive to bigger deficit. Maybe they have a lower metabolism, right? Because they're just haven't been active their whole life. Maybe their biomarkers are not in the healthiest place. They have a low metabolism. And I really just want them to walk a lot. I want them to walk a lot and I want them to get used to the habits. And in that case, we may only be in a very slight deficit and we may not even see massive progress initially because of their metabolism, but it's the habits, it's the systems that happen. But I will say I don't want people to be frustrated for long. If you're stuck, if you're plateaued for too long, something's off.
Yeah, I agree with you on all that. It's again, we probably don't need to tell most people to be less aggressive. It's probably pushing them to be a little bit more on track and pushing it a little bit more. I personally, and I don't know if this is how you use it, but I like to reframe it of, okay, say we're aiming for a certain amount of weight loss. If it is a little bit slower, let's just talking to them about the benefits of it being a little bit slower, right? Because again, I think people think that it's either kind of a pass or fail. Hey, either I'm like losing a ton of weight or I'm in the slow deficit and that's not a good thing. There's still some positives, but as you said, the main downside of it is you're just not going to see as rapid of a change potentially, depending on where you're at, right? If you have a good amount of body fat to lose, it's like, hey, let's keep it going. But again, I think when it comes to slow versus fast weight loss, people could be fairly aggressive in say 2 weeks, but where they tend to fall off is in the long term, right? So we don't really need to worry about that, I feel like, in the long term. So pushing people to go a little bit quicker is never the worst thing in the world for a lot of people.
Yeah, and I love reframing. Like you said, everyone's going to respond differently to that. Some people are way more impatient than others, and you have to have that conversation. And some people, if you're listening, you've never lifted hard, if you've never trained properly, and you start training, and you're in a slight deficit, be careful that you're not actually not be careful, but you may be gaining a bunch of muscle. Let's just be honest. And that will throw all the numbers off. That will make it look like you're burning fewer calories if you're tracking. It will make it look like you're in a weight plateau because you're gaining weight from muscle. There's so many things. So you to really have to understand how expenditure works and how dynamic it is. And that could be a super empowering message when somebody gets it through their head that, holy crap, I'm actually leaner at the same weight. And that's important.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's talk on the flip side now here. Surpluses. How are you setting those up? What are you looking for in terms of weight gain? What does that kind of look like?
I love my surpluses, man, for myself and for anybody.
Who doesn't?
It's funny. One of my friends just joked. He sent me a message. He's, what does it mean when you need a maintenance diet break while in a surplus? I get it.
Yep.
Yeah, surpluses are funny because we have a huge range to play with depending on what you're going for. If you're going all out, like aggressive, tends to be more men than women that want to do that. But I've had some female clients who are good with it. Then I'm going to put you way up in that like 0.3, 0.4% body weight a week. It's going to be like multiple pounds a month type of deal. It's not what we're talking about here. I will say that's a super effective thing to do if you do it right. What I like is two situations. One is what I call aggressive maintenance, which is we're going to set your target to maintenance, but I want you to overshoot every day by 100 calories. And it sounds like, I don't know, some people think that's a lot, some people think it's a little, but the way the body adapts constantly, if you can give yourself what looks like plenty of a surplus, which means you're absolutely hitting maintenance no matter what, that means every resource in your body down to the cellular and hormonal level are like satisfied, like they've got their food, right? And so because they have their food, the rest can get shuttled into building muscle very efficiently. To the point where I've become convinced that for some people, they really don't need to go into a big surplus ever and can respond. Others do need to, so it's highly individual. So I like setting maintenance and then overshooting or setting slight surplus of 0.2%. Again, like the fat loss discussion, I don't like the in-betweens that are just like barely there, but not quite there. I'd rather be close to maintenance, but above, or a meaningful surplus or a really strong surplus. So that's kind of the basics. We can go from there.
Yeah, I like your thought there. Aggressive maintenance, right? Where it's, hey, let's push it on the higher. And I think that's a good way to put it. And you did clarify too, hey, again, a large surplus, you said 0.3, 0.4. Again, probably at the end of the day, that's still not necessarily like a massive surplus that some people would do.
It's not a dreamer bulk
that we've done in the past, but still a very controlled surplus. But as you said, if you do it right, and again, this comes back to nailing the inputs, which I feel like people often overlook when they're trying to gain weight or build muscle. And I'm assuming that's kind of what you mean by if you do it the right way, it can be very effective there. I'm assuming you're talking about, again, nailing the variables that we've talked about throughout today.
Yeah, sometimes I take that stuff for granted. And I know you and I talk about those topics on our shows. But if somebody's brand new to this, what is Jeff talking about? We're talking training consistently, progressive loading, not getting too hung up in whether we're training for strength or hypertrophy. There's a lot of flex and there's a huge spectrum there, but training hard and making progress. Obviously, getting enough protein, getting enough calories are by definition part of this discussion because we're trying to be above maintenance. Getting your sleep, continuing to walk. A lot of people think like in a surplus, I'm just going to move less, right? Because
I used to do that.
I'm trying to gain weight. No, it's great for recovery. In fact, you might have more resources now where you can experiment with things like sprinting. I'm big into sprinting now. That's its own episode probably. And yeah, you got to have all the pillars down no matter what phase you're in. But what's nice about being above maintenance is you should know it. It should feel like a surplus because effectively that's what you're in, but you're not getting the negatives. Some people experience like rapid weight gain and extra fluffiness and like bloating and some of these symptoms people describe when they're actually consistently pushing it. And you're not constantly going for Pop-Tarts and Cinnamon Toast Crunch. And I don't know that those are the things that I eat, but why they came to my head to add more calories.
So who do you feel like that kind of more, that smaller kind of deficit, surplus is for, and what are the benefits of being there? You may have hit on that a little bit, but who's that for, and what are some of the benefits of that?
I think somebody who's still got some hangups, fear, self-doubt surrounding weight gain, who's never done it before on purpose, but who's willing to give it a shot. It's a good place. It's kind of like baby steps, right? It's like the bunny slope of gaining. And you may find that they get such a great response that builds the confidence to know that I can control my physique, right? I can control it. And now I'm going to trust that the process will work in slightly bigger extremes. So that's one person from a mental state. I would say people who are leaner as well, who just don't need to go into massive weight gaining phases and are just trying to like slowly increase their lifts over time. It's maintenance, right? It's just maintenance, but they're just not falling under into dieting. There's probably a bunch more scenarios, Jeff. It really depends on the client and what they want. It can work for anybody. I go into those phases myself quite often when I get out of a fat loss phase and I'm back at maintenance, I don't even want to just barely be at maintenance anymore. I want to actually push it a little bit so I know for sure that my body is recovered. Yeah, those are a few that come to mind.
What's that time frame on this? Do you have this like specific time frame that you're shooting for, or is it all just dependent on the person and where they're at and everything like that?
So we talked about one of my scenarios here and not the other, but the aggressive maintenance, I still think of it as maintenance. So your weight, you will drift very slowly over time. So it's useless setting a target weight in that scenario. It's more of let's focus on all the other things. And then you're going to be tracking your food sufficiently to stay in that position. So there's still control and awareness to that. And we focus on the biofeedback and your measurements and your lifts and all of that. So I think that's great when you're in like a strength building mode and not really trying to add a bunch of muscle through hypertrophy type training. It's really solid. The scenario I didn't mention yet was the little bit more aggressive where you set it to gain, but you crank down that rate of loss pretty low. So again,
rate of loss or rate of gain?
Rate of gain, sorry. You crank down that rate of gain, so it's 0.2%, which really is that, it isn't that much. And in that case, you are actually looking to push it a little bit and make sure you get past any hard gaining plateaus, which are notorious for everybody. Don't think that you're a hard gainer and someone else is not. When you gain, you're going to hit these hard gaining phases. And if you're working with a coach, they should be good enough to see it coming and help you push ahead of that. Literally just eat more. You're going to have to eat more, but you're going to have to push ahead of it. So for those situations, I will say, let's do a runway of 6 to 9 to 12 months. I think a 12-month building phase could work when you're going at a reasonable rate, depending on how much you're willing to gain. If for guys, that might be 15, 20 pounds. For women, it might be like 10 pounds.
Yeah. So it's not, I guess compared to a little bit more aggressive, would you say that allows you to have a little bit of a longer runway there to be able to be in this phase?
Yeah, the problem is, Jeff, it's not even a phase. It's not, I personally think you should periodize in some way over time. So even if you're going to do an aggressive maintenance, I feel like you want to have an endpoint or something to look forward to or a way to tie that to your training cycles. I don't know. It's rare for me to see somebody who just wants to perpetually stay there. Have you seen that?
Oh, like in the surplus? Is that kind of what you're saying?
In the bare maintenance surplus, yeah.
Yeah, I think the benefit of it is you can really stay there as long as you want,
can.
right?
Yeah.
But we've talked about the pros and cons of going at that approach. But yeah, I do feel like people eventually, they do want to switch things up after a while. They get super bored doing kind of the same thing. So that's where I see
the human side of it. Plus, as a coach, like when somebody's paying you, you're trying to help them through the growth and learning and education process of this. And to me, part of the value is not just doing it, but also learning how to navigate the different aspects by the time our time is up. Unless you want to hire me for 5 years, I'll be your coach the whole time. That's fine.
So as far as this goes too, then, so any other training or nutrition considerations around gaining phase here and being in the small surplus that you want to let people know about?
I think some people, the psychological aspect of the more extreme approaches can be challenging and can get out of control, if you will, or people don't quite have the confidence to do that. And that's okay. If that's where you are right now, I think that's the value of these approaches, where don't think of it as static. Don't think of it as like just floating, trying to maintain your weight. Think of it as an opportunity to transform your body without all the stress potentially of a building or gaining phase, and then setting up your system. And once you see that that's possible, then you can go to try other things. And I encourage people to experiment. Like, it's a lot of fun, man. If bulk cut, try different types of dieting approaches, different protocols. It's a lot of fun.
And then in terms of, again, I'm assuming same thing that you said with the deficit, but do you do any calorie cycling, anything like that here with these in this phase?
So calorie cycling, I'm not a huge fan of in terms of, you're talking like carb and calorie cycling with your training days and things like that.
Yeah.
But refeeds and diet breaks for sure, or lifestyle calorie cycling, right? Like where you're aligning it with when you just want to eat more food or less food. Beyond that, I've talked on my podcast about all sorts of exotic ways to structure fat loss with like stair step, 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, cycle syncing. The jury is out on whether there's any relevance there, but for some women, there's a little bit of a need for that. Yeah. So you've got to make it work for you is the end goal. It's a big message.
Yeah. Is there anything else on the small surplus that you want to let the audience know about, or that we didn't chat about, or I didn't ask you about, or anything like that?
I'm a huge fan of carbs. That's the only thing I'm going to say. We didn't get into nutrition, but man, like just time and time again, people who are trying to do the keto approach seem to struggle. Carnivore, keto, all of those diets, when it comes to energy and lifting and pushing it. As much as people on YouTube, the trolls online want to argue otherwise, that they feel great and awesome and every solution gets solved by these diets, when you're trying to build muscle, it can hold you back. I'm pretty confident in saying that, not as a certainty, but for the vast majority of people.
Yeah, no, that's a good point you bring up. Anytime we're at maintenance or we're trying to build some lean tissue like that, you got to eat enough carbs in that process. Weight loss, that's a whole nother thing that we can talk about in the short term maybe. But again, like you said, from a muscle building standpoint, like some restrictive diet like that is going to exclude an entire food group or a macronutrient group. I just think, like you said, it's going to be a suboptimal when we're talking about it in the context of gaining muscle and being at energy balance or a small surplus there. So cool, man. I think at the end of the day here with both of these episodes and just what we've talked about today is I just feel, at least when it comes to gaining muscle, I think we're going to see less, what I guess really at the end of the day, we can see a lot of change without necessarily seeing our body weight change a ton. And I think that's something that a lot of people, they have a hard time kind of understanding that concept of body composition, right? And I think that's super important. I think it's often overlooked, and the weight gain and the weight loss is the main priority. And again, those things are going to be necessary for, again, the energy balance you're going to be in. But at the end of the day, I think a lot of people, they put too much stock into just the weight when we need to also look at the body composition there. So I think these are super helpful. Is there anything else you want to let the audience know about or anything like that?
Yeah, the last thing that comes to mind, we didn't talk about measuring body fat. I'm not a big fan of almost any method of measuring body fat because they're all pretty darn inaccurate. You can use calipers, you could use the Navy formula. What really counts is, are you progressing in the gym? And what I mean by that is, do you feel like you're getting stronger, more athletic, able to push over time? Because if you are, as a beginner, strength is probably the priority, and most people are going to be training in a way that focuses on strength, right? Compound lifts and just pushing those up, because your body is developing the movement patterns, the neuromuscular adaptations. And then once you're into that intermediate phase, the vast majority of results are going to come from a combination of focusing on strength and muscle. And sometimes you're going to build muscle, it's going to make you stronger. Sometimes you got to get stronger, it's going to help you build more muscle. It's that base peak growth over time. And if you're doing that, then you know you're eating enough and you're doing what you need to do, and you're going to see it in the mirror as well. So don't get hung up on body fat and DEXA scans and all that. That's my final message.
No, that's a good point, man, because people do. And it's at the end of the day, would you rather the reader say you're 10% body fat, or would you rather look like you're 10% body fat? I know which one I'm choosing, and exactly. I'm not going to worry about that number on that. That's a whole nother thing that we could probably talk about for hours. Cool, Philip. All right, man. Well, again, really appreciate this. Like we said at the onset here, we have the other kind of angle where, you know, being at maintenance calories, some pros and cons of that, what that can look like. And again, that is going to be found on your podcast, the Wits Weights Podcast. I don't know what episode number it is, but it's going to be released on the same day as this. So go check that out. We'll link it in the show notes as well, too. Is there anywhere else where the audience can find you or anything like that, Philip?
No, go check out the podcast right now. Go to Wits Weights, follow it, because Jeff gives a pretty good masterclass on all of his thoughts about body recomp and maintenance. So it's a good companion to this episode, and you'll find all my other ways to contact me through that.
Yep, absolutely, man. Again, make sure you go check out Wits Weights Podcast, Philip. We really appreciate your time, man. Ton of great information here. We'll chat with you next time.
Thanks, man. Great to be here. Cool. I'm happy with that. How about you? Let me stop the recording.